as usual, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as always, is a journalist and publisher, Blackstar News, broadcaster, Blackstar News Show, every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern on WBI.org, 99.5 FM New York Radio. He's also the author of Manufacturing Hate, which inspired this program. Speak no other than Comrade Milton Allimadi. Welcome, sir. Welcome. Welcome.
Karibu. Thank you, brother. Asante.
Yes, you're most welcome, as always. And without further ado, we go into our news stories for the week. Our headline story comes from Radio France International, and is becoming a regular feature on here. And I speak of none other than Monsieur Macron. So the headline reads, Senegal and Chad rebuke Macron over inaccurate French troops withdrawal claims. The Senegalese Prime Minister and Chadian Foreign Minister have condemned claims made by Emmanuel Macron regarding negotiations about the withdrawal of French troops from several African countries, dismissing them as inaccurate. And that's the Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko. Macron said during his discourse that the announced withdrawal of French military bases have been negotiated between the African countries involved and France. He claimed it was purely out of convenience and politeness that France allowed these African nations to make the announcement first. The remarks were made at the annual conference of ambassadors held this year on 6th and 7th of January in Paris. However, Senegalese Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko criticized Macron's remarks as completely inaccurate. And while Chadian Foreign Minister Abdourahmane Koulamala described them as disdainful. The Chad position on that news story was, quoting Mr. Koulamala, the government of the Republic of Chad expressed its deep concern over the recent comments by the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, which revealed a disdainful attitude towards Africa and Africans, Koulamala said. He added, despite 60 years of presence in the country, France's contribution has often been limited to serving their own strategic interests with little genuine or lasting impact on the development of the Chadian people. Mr. Sonko, on the other hand, said no discussion or negotiation about withdrawal had taken place to date, and the decision made by Senegal stems solely from its own will as a free, independent, and sovereign country. Your initial thoughts, sir?
Well, obviously, Macron wants to find a face-saving spin to the whole narrative of being kicked out of Africa. You know, saying, oh, we sat down, we discussed, and we both came to the conclusion that this would be a mutually beneficial move, Remember, it was first Mali that announced the expulsion of French troops and French dominance a few years ago.
Yep.
And of course, Mali and the military there, the military government that had come to power, was frustrated at the lack of progress in the war against the very well-armed militant groups that have besieged the country. And of course, you and I know this all emanated after the destruction of the Libyan government in 2010.
Correct.
2011. So Mali made news. If people go back and look at the way it was covered at that time, it was unprecedented. An African country telling France military, get out. That was huge news. And I advise people, go back and look at the way it was covered at that time, both by international media and by local media in African countries as well. It was almost unbelievable. And then you had Burkina Faso doing the same thing. You had Niger doing the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because that kind of expulsion is actually a repudiation of what France's narrative had been, that even after independence, these countries needed our tutelage And that is why we remained there. Of course, we both know the truth is the opposite. We wanted to remain there so that we could continue colonialism in another form.
True.
Which is the case. And no European country likes to be seen as being kicked out, particularly by an African country. You see? It doesn't reflect well on the allegations of European superiority. You see? So now, he's saying that this thing was mutually negotiated. And now these countries are saying, wait a minute, there was no negotiation. We said it's time to go. And the other major point I can make is this. When Chad, of all the countries, hitherto regarded and identified as a neo-colonial French entity, is speaking this kind of language, then you know things have truly changed on the ground. That's what I can say.
There's a part here that I think should not go uncommented. It's where is it? It's the lack of gratitude. Macron also criticized the ingratitude of certain leaders on the African continent, suggesting they would not be leading sovereign nations today if the French army had not been deployed there. To which
Go ahead.
To which the retort was, let's observe that France had neither the capacity nor the legitimacy to ensure Africa's security and sovereignty. On the contrary, it's France that have often contributed to destabilizing certain African countries such as Libya, which you alluded to earlier, with disastrous consequences for the stability and security of the Sahel. A staunch critic of French presence in his country before coming to power, Sonko reminded the French that if African soldiers, sometimes forcibly conscripted, mistreated, and ultimately betrayed, had not been deployed during the Second World War to defend France, the country might still be German today.
Okay, that one, the last remark. It could be a coincidence, but it could also be because I've been tweeting that. I tweeted that actually a couple of years ago. Was it when it was Sarkozy, I think, who said part of the problem is that African countries, women have too many children. And that is the problem that's holding back economic growth. And in fact, he had responded to an African journalist's question. I forget which country the journalist is from. And I tweeted, I said, the journalist, I wish he had been quicker on his feet in terms of his response. He should have said, with all due respect, Mr. President, had it not been for African soldiers, you might be speaking to me in German today.
Yes, very much so. I mean, there's also, go on.
What happened this week in Chad? Just a few days ago. There was an attempted coup d'etat. I would not be surprised if it has something to do with the current deterioration in relations between the two countries. When Macron says that, certain leaders will not be ruling sovereign states without our presence, he's certainly not referring to Senegal. In this case, I think he's specifically referring to Chad.
To Chad, yeah.
So that maybe elements of the military who said, okay, this is a good opportunity for us to get rid of the current government and present ourselves as more loyal or beholden to France, and Macron would endorse us and welcome us, you see? Or it could have been inspired and instigated by France itself. So I want to wait and see what additional information comes out from this attempted coup d'etat in Chad. And mind you, it doesn't mean that I'm a supporter of the government in Chad that almost suffered a coup d'etat. I think the jury is still out. As far as I'm concerned, there had been and are a neo-colonial government led by the son of the former neo-colonial president, you know,
Idris Deby.
from one Deby to the other, you know.
I also wanted to add, when he was talking about the lack of gratitude on the part of the French, on the part of the Africans, he neglected to say that during the Vichy government occupation of France, the government of Charles de Gaulle was actually based in Congo Brazzaville
and financed
exactly
by African resources directly.
There you go. There you go. So it's almost as if they're baiting us to actually be much more conversant with our own history.
Which is fine. Which is fine.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Because now this gives us an opportunity to expose their arrogance, their white supremacist notion toward Africa.
Yeah.
And to revisit all these moments in history that our younger generation need to know about anyway. You know, lack of gratitude. You've been stealing resources from all these countries. You know, prior to colonialism, during colonialism, after colonialism, up to date, right? You hijack the economies by having them hold their reserves in your Treasury Department, in your central bank. You know, you plunder uranium from Niger. And that is why you are insisting that they go back to the government that was overthrown in Niger, because that government would ensure that you continue plundering uranium, because you need it for 75% of your energy. It's remarkable. It's amazing. But, you know, he even cannot be pragmatic and say, okay, let's look bad in the eyes of the world, so long as we can still have
access
financial arrangements that benefit France. But he's so arrogant and so petty that he can't stand the fact that Africans are saying, we kicked France out. He can't live with that. So he's even so reckless and willing to worsen diplomatic relations by going around and saying stuff like that. Oh, you know, there's no gratitude. Oh, you know, we negotiated these things, yeah. But it speaks to the mindset of even the European who thinks he's not a white supremacist, that there's deep-seated white supremacy within himself that he cannot withhold. That's what it demonstrates to me.
I mean, when he, again, going back to the issue of gratitude, it reminded me of a quote by Walter Rodney when he said in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, he said the argument suggests that on one hand, there was exploitation and oppression, but on the other hand, colonialism did add some benefit for Africans, and they helped develop Africa. But it is our contention that this is completely false. Colonialism had only one hand, and it was a one-arm bandit.
Absolutely, 100%. Because the part that is not, and somebody can actually have a very good book on this. You know, maybe this is actually my potential dissertation. Somebody could show the disruption in Africa's organic development, which I guess is what Rodney's book was doing.
Yep.
And obviously Rodney's book is written in 1972. So it could continue that thesis, dissertation of Rodney, and even expand on it and show how, had it not been for colonialism, where Africa's economy would be now. Because you can go back and look at the rate of growth, you know, because mind you, many people forget how destructive it was, not so much the cultural imperialism, the racism of colonialism, but the hijacking of Africa's economic pattern, so that you have Britain saying Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, you can only trade with me exclusively. You know how destructive that is? You're not searching for the best options for your country because you've been hijacked by Britain. Britain saying, these are the only things you can produce, whether it's tea, whether it's coffee, whether it's, peanuts, we call it groundnuts, these amounts, and this is what I'll pay you for it. I fix the price. And then these are the manufacturers that you will import from Britain, not options from where you can get the best deal, only from Britain. You see? Think about those kind of economies. And those economies prevail for 6, 7, 8 decades, almost a century, right?
Yep.
And before that, as you know, Africans had developed their own trade routes. Nobody was forcing the African states on the east coast of Africa to trade with China, to trade with India. They saw benefit in what they wanted to produce to trade with India, China, and the Far East. Prior to colonialism, you see, they would have kept looking for their better options. You see? And also, colonialism prevented African countries from industrializing, right?
Yeah.
Many of the industrialized countries today industrialized at a very late stage, meaning very recently, because the technology was becoming widely available. But European colonial powers would not allow their colonies to industrialize because that would be suicidal. It would be competing with their own manufacturing industries in the mother country. You see? So all of this, if more people knew about it, Macron would not dare make a asinine statement like that. You see?
So one final question on that story. How can African nations ensure sustainable partnership while safeguarding their sovereignty?
You can't be a partner with somebody who's exploiting you. You see? You only be a partner, a trading partner, if you decide what you want to sell and you can negotiate the price. The US negotiates with its trading partners, right?
Correct.
Britain doesn't come and say, this is what you're going to produce. And US, and this is what I'm going to buy at what price. And this is what you're going to buy from Britain. Or the other way around. US saying, making those statements. It doesn't work that way. Same thing with China. Because these are people that have now equal weight to some measure. They have advantages in certain commodities and positions. We have in Africa what you call potential advantage or latent advantage. We have all the advantages, but we cannot benefit from any of these advantages because we are too weak. As these tiny, tiny states, we are too weak. Look at a country like Congo with all its resources. The population should be enjoying wealth and prosperity, should be much wealthier than people in the United States, people in France, people in Britain. But so long as they come and they say, Congo, you're cobalt, you're coltan, you're uranium, you're copper, this is what I'm going to pay you for it.
So there is
and unless we change that, it'll be the same thing. And how can we change it? By really getting rid of these tiny, tiny, useless, small states. We are actually imposing suffering on our people by holding on to these states that were created by European colonialists anyway.
Specifically for their own interest as well.
Yeah, but we have serious issues to deal with. If we cannot get our people to even love themselves and work amongst themselves in harmony within our own individual tiny useless states. How are we going to, but in fact, people don't realize it would actually be much easier. So look at Rwanda, for example, where you have this ethnic combustibility between the minority Tutsi, who actually control the country and the military right now under Kagame, and the majority Hutu, who are being imposed on by the ethnic minority. If you had a federated East Africa, that would not be the situation. The Tutsi would be one of the many smaller ethnic communities within that East African Federation.
With its own agency.
The Hutu would be one of the relatively larger ethnic communities within that broader African Federation. So that animosity, that tension that's led to these recurrent massacres would not exist. You see? So these broad entities would actually make it easier for us to create harmony in Africa.
Okay. And speaking of creating broader issues, the UK has decided to bring forward negotiations with regards to the Chagos Islands. And for that, we go to the Financial Times. And they say the fear of Trump is the beginning of wisdom.
Yes.
The UK, the story comes from the Financial Times. And the UK has offered to pay front-load payments in the Chagos Island talks. Officials are racing to conclude deals before Donald Trump takes office later this month. I wonder why. The UK government has offered to front-load a tranche of payments to Mauritius in order to finalize the draft deal over the sovereignty of the Chagos Island, according to people familiar with the talks. Britain is offering to pay Mauritius about £90 million a year for the initial 99-year lease of Diego Garcia, a major atoll in the Indian Ocean archipelago, which hosts a strategic, crucial UK and US military base. London has issued a new proposal to pay an initial tranche covering several years' worth of payments as a sweetener to finalize the stalled deal before Donald Trump's inauguration on January 20. Last month, which is the reason why they're bringing this forward, last month, Ragulam, who happens to be the new prime minister, declared the proposed agreement, which had not been ratified by treaty, would not produce the benefit that the nation will expect, and that the negotiation had restarted. People familiar with the talk said late last year that the money had been a key sticking point for Port Louis, which is the capital of Mauritius, but also questions about the terms of the lease and the UK's right to review it. So you talked about equal partnership. This is the question being coming up for discussion again here. So what are your initial thoughts based on the reason for the deal now taking a new life of its own, especially in light of the 47th president coming to power?
Well, actually, I support what this article is basically saying. Okay. I support the position of the British government. I think they should go ahead and conclude this deal. That's only one part of it, because you don't know what might happen when, in fact, I think Mauritius should actually be much more interested in concluding this deal, because I think, there's conflict here, and the two things, because Trump himself, really, I don't see him as an imperialist, He doesn't, in fact, the Democratic administration has been much more imperialist than when Trump was in office. I mean, and one could say he's so blatantly pro-Israel. What? The genocide against the Palestinians happened during whose watch, right? So, this whole thing about Trump, I think it's often blown out of proportion. Libya was destroyed under a democratic administration. You see,
Obama.
Sometimes we have to be honest in reviewing these things. Yes, Trump is a racist. Yes, Republican politicians tend to be much more racist, blatantly racist. True. But which administrations have been much more destructive toward Africa? Think about it, because they don't, burst out with their racist comments like the Republicans do. Does that mean we have to say that they are better when the facts show otherwise? That's crazy. That's preposterous. What is happening in the Congo today? Congo is being violated by Rwanda, correct?
Yeah, correct.
This could be ended. Just a phone call from Washington to Kagame and to Museveni, to Kigali and to Kampala. It's happening during a democratic administration. So on the one hand, I'm saying, maybe I'm concerned that the deal which would give some level of sovereignty to the people there in the islands has the possibility of being disrupted under Republican. But then on the other hand, maybe not, since the guy does not seem to be an imperialist. You see, he couldn't have people within his administration that may want to be much more imperialist. But even him, if people went directly to him, he would make the ultimate decision. You see, he would not be upstaged by his underlings. But I can see why the UK believes this is one of the best deals it can get, and is even willing to, pay upfront money in advance. And I don't blame the administration in Mauritius, for trying to also milk out more money. But the bigger picture is this, It just shows you how weak we are as a people when we are talking about, okay, how much is a good deal for us to sell our sovereignty? At the end of the day, that's what it boils down to, you see? A future generation, maybe 15, 20 years from now, in Mauritius, young people with new mindset can say, wait, the era of colonialism is over and imperialism. We are abrogating all these treaties. We are just taking all the rights into our hands,
So two prong questions. Okay, so one is, so how can international law, the use of international law, which is what instigated the British renegotiating with the Mauritians, the 2019 decision by the International Court of Justice, that the indigenous people be allowed back onto the land. So my question would be, so how going forward, in light of, you said the mindset of the people might change, that we're no longer tolerating imperialism and colonialism. How does international law, now taking that into account, balance the so-called strategic interest? Because that will still be around, and with the rights of indigenous people. So that's the first part. The second part would be, although the democratic side of the political family within the United States have been much more vitriolic outside the United States in terms of their foreign policy. Kennedy with Congo, Jimmy Carter with Angola, what was his name? Obama with Libya. Do you think, in light of Trump's recent pronouncements with invading Greenland and Panama, that would not upstate the cart of what you alluded to in terms of,
Okay, so to start with the second question, I think that is bluster, That's just, there are some moments where Trump is being Trump. So, for example, deporting undocumented immigrants in this country.
Okay.
That's not going to be possible. It's just physically impossible. Because number one, it's going to lead to some incidents of people being killed, you know, as they're trying to be forcibly removed, right?
Yeah.
Many incidents like that, and that's going to lead to social protests and a lot of upheaval. If you think the protest after George Floyd was something, then you haven't seen a true protest yet. Number one. Number two, what it will do to disrupt the U.S. economy.
Will be too much for...
Leading Republicans would be urging him, stop this nonsense, because people would not be showing up to work. Right? Okay. And these are the people that uphold the U.S. economy. Who is the one that's doing all those, you know, practically, you know, free labor, right? Cheap labor in every major city. Who are the ones doing it? Right? The demonized immigrants. These are the ones who are doing it. So now they won't show up for work because they're afraid they might be, you know, arrested on their way to work or from work.
Or at work.
Right? Or at work, absolutely, because they said they would be raiding the, you know, workplaces as well. So he might do something initially in the beginning to live up to his campaign promises, but it won't last long because economically it's just too disruptive. Even he himself, the guy was not paying his employees at some of his mansions and his golf courses. He was not paying his Mexican immigrant employees, you see? So that's why I say, you know, this issue of invading, you know, Panama or Greenland, I think that's just, you know, bluster. Now, on the issue of international law, as you and I know, international law is only applied when the powers that be want it applied. If international law was being applied, we would have a Palestinian state already today, meaning the attack on Israel in October that instigated this genocide never would have occurred because there would already be a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
Why? What motive would they have if they have an Israeli state, a Palestinian state, for people to attack Israel and kill people the way they did in October to instigate this, you see? If international law was being applied. If international law was being applied, then the genocide in Gaza would have been stopped after South Africa filed its suit.
Yeah.
If international law was being applied, why was Netanyahu arrested when he came here in his last visit, you know, to the United States, right?
Okay.
Although maybe that's the only country he dares go to right now, right?
Of course.
You see? Yeah. So international law is applied too selectively, and that's been the problem. So we can't say because there's been a ruling, therefore this and that can't be done. You know, it can be done, and it has always been done, you see, unfortunately. And that's part of the hypocrisy. They want to invoke the law only when it suits their needs, not when the law is the law, which should be the case. You know, the law should be the law and should apply equally to everyone. And that's how we can start creating harmony, right?
Yeah.
By making it clear that you can be a large country, you can be a small country, but if the system that's set up to adjudicate makes a ruling, then it must be applied. And if we set a pattern like that where it's applied consistently, then we would have to people would tend to rely more on these kinds of institutions rather than military might.
Yeah.
Because we know once we prevail in making our argument and convince all these other nations to support us, and there's a ruling, there's no need for war. But so long as you say we only respect the rulings if it suits our needs, it's hypocrisy,
Let me tap one more question onto the issue of Chagos Island. Now, we're looking at a case of settler colonialism being redressed, right? So could it be a test case in the international court that countries like the Kikuyus in Kenya, the Shonas and Indembeles in Zimbabwe, and the Herero and the Nama in Namibia could bring a case like this, charging settler colonialism as against the colonial powers? Could you see that happening?
Yes, why not? But instead of coming as small entities like that, they should go through their national states, They should go through the state of Kenya. They should go through the state of Namibia, which in fact they did do against the Germans for the genocide of the Herero and Nama people. So here's the deal. And this might have happened if we had a United States of Africa, if we had formed the United States of Africa in the 1960s, because then they could make a demand on all the former European powers. So you know what, we want to come back in Berlin. Let's have the conference at Berlin, where you had the initial conference to dismantle Africa, to disrupt Africa. Let's close the Berlin era by having another Berlin conference. And this one would be the conference of compensation for the victims of what was initiated at Berlin. So we assess a certain amount for Britain. We know the countries that you took. We can guesstimate the annual surplus you're extracting, for a 5-year period, and then project that for the entire period that you were there. And then we can come up with a certain amount for all of them. And then we can say, okay, because, we tend to be humane by nature, we'll give you a discount. We'll discount 50%, but pay us this amount. And then the Berlin era will be over. We'll never bring up the issue of colonialism again.
Can I be facetious?
We could do that if we were powerful.
Yeah.
You see, united, like China, like India. India's much more powerful than us because they have the population and some level of technology now, but we have much more resources, and we would supersede India within a very short time. And we can start making these just demands, you see?
So who will pick up
and they would have to pay attention, because at the end of the day, they want our resources, you see? They would listen.
So who will pick up the tab for Portugal?
No, Portugal will discount by 90%. Portugal has no money. In fact, Portugal will say, okay, no, I was about to say, if you agree for us to colonize you, but it would cost us to colonize Portugal. Yeah, but the other ones would pay. They have money.
Yeah. Speaking of the other ones paying, Apple has been up in the news this week. And for the next story, we go to Radio France International, and it's the DRC case against Apple brings new hope in conflict mineral crisis. As the DRC brings an unprecedented case against Apple and the company offers assurances it will no longer use conflict minerals from Central Africa, experts are questioning whether real change is on the horizon in illegal mining. So, the story was filed in by Melissa Chenna. The war over the so-called conflict minerals is more than 2 decades old, but the fight to prevent their exploitation by global tech companies is much newer. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, various armed groups, including both the Congolese army and rival armed rebel groups, among them the M23, occupy mines and trading routes, forcing miners to work for free. Minerals from these mines include tungsten, tin, and tantalum, often referred as the 3Ts, have been illegally smuggled through Rwanda for several years and eventually exported to tech companies such as Apple, Tesla, and Samsung. Wow. But the DRC filed criminal charges against Apple over the use of conflict minerals, and there is a renewed hope that this illegal mining could be brought to an end. A criminal complaint was filed early in December against Apple's subsidiaries in France and Belgium, where the Congolese government alleged Apple uses conflict minerals laundered through international supply chains, which the American tech giant denies. How do you see this one panning out?
I support it wholeheartedly. Because, and the good thing is, they may ignore our laws within our countries and our weak institutions, but it's harder for them to flout law in the United States or in Europe because they can be subjected to serious sanctions. They can be deprived of participating in the market in Europe. So they cannot afford to ignore rulings in the United States and Europe and those established industrialized nations. So I hope that the case does go forward. I hope there's a ruling favorable to the Congolese, and you will see its immediate impact on the ground. Because the sad thing is the war, so-called war we are seeing in Eastern Congo right now, it's not a war between two nations. This is a war of aggression against Congo and the people of Congo by Uganda and by Rwanda as proxies for international corporations who continue to steal Congo's wealth. Uganda exports hundreds of millions of dollars in gold that Uganda does not even have. You see, it has even built smelters in Uganda for gold that it does not have. There was a story, as you know, a few years ago in the Financial Times, I believe, where a Congolese minister said Rwanda steals up to $1 billion of Congo's resources per year. So why would Rwanda want that war to end? Why? Think about it. It's financed and trained a whole army, which is Rwandese, and calls it M23, quote unquote, rebel. What kind of rebels are dressed in uniform that are comparable to uniform that United States soldiers wears? And equipment, mobile satellite phones, walkie-talkies, clean, well-pressed uniforms, vehicles that need fuel. How do you fuel them? When there's no petroleum in the Congo, in that part of the Congo. Absolute nonsense, So this war technically is actually being financed by companies like Apple and the beneficiaries of those resources. So I like this lawsuit in that it's not buying the propaganda that this is a domestic, local rebellion that's happening in the Congo. It's finally taking the foreign elements that are involved in the genocide against Africans in the Congo to task. And that's the only thing they respect when the courts make a ruling in their countries or in Europe. So I'm very much in support of this lawsuit.
There was a question I wrote down earlier with regards to this lawsuit. And yes, it's should consumers bear responsibility for ethical sourcing? I mean, we read on their website, no, child slavery was not involved in any of the products that was used to make this. Should we take that much more seriously? And how does that look if we're to hold them to account?
No, repeat the question, sorry.
Okay, so the question should be, should consumers bear responsibility for the ethical sourcing that we often find on their websites? And if we do, what does that look like?
Okay. Well,
because you would often hear the likes of Apple, the likes of I don't go onto Tesla's website.
no, it
So,
doesn't have to be just Apple. I mean,
okay, Microsoft,
yeah,
you go on there, they were against slavery, child slavery and what have you. Now,
right.
should we
Even though
take
they are
you,
in support of slavery. I mean, they wouldn't say that on their website, of course. But there are two elements here.
yeah.
For certain products, it's easier to enforce because they're limited. Because generally speaking, Africa is exploited because of consumers outside Africa. You see?
Okay.
If they took a stand and said, we want the ingredients that goes into the manufacturers not to come from the exploitation of Africans, then the standard of living in African countries would propel almost overnight. You see? Because then we would have to look at the tea from Kenya, the cocoa from Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Nigeria. You see? We'd have to look at the gold. We'd have to look at the copper, the coltan, the cobalt, right? Even the consumable fruits, like bananas. You see? All of these are underpriced, meaning African labor and African resources being exploited, right?
Okay.
So that's the general level. That's on one level.
Okay.
But it's something that is desirable but not practical, you see? But when it comes to other commodities like diamond, which is very rare and you can isolate, of course, it's rare because the production and distribution is very controlled as well.
Yeah, true.
But if you make a campaign, a propaganda, you promote, you show what diamond is doing and the cost to the people, like what it was doing in Sierra Leone, right? People will respond to that. So you can do it for certain commodities, right?
Yeah.
For computer products and technology, yes, to some extent, but it doesn't bring that kind of connection that people have to something like diamond. That is so beautiful, that is supposed to convey so much love, but at the same time is actually spilling so much blood in Africa. So I think promoting that one was much more easier than saying, you see this cell phone you're holding, look at the blood it's causing in Africa. It still actually has impact, you see?
Yeah.
You can do it for cell phone, you can do it for computer. It won't have the same impact as for diamonds. So it depends on the product that you're dealing with.
Okay.
So yes, consumers ultimately play the determining role because at the end of the day, without these corporations being able to sell to consumers, they are out of business, you see?
True.
And that is why they're very conscious of things like consumer boycotts, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think this one can lend itself to a campaign of consumer boycott because the area of concentration where people are being victimized can be very specific, which in this case is Eastern Congo,
Okay. Okay. And speaking of exploitation, we go to our final story for the week. And it comes from the New York Times, your favorite paper of choice. So the New York Times files the story, Sudanese paramilitary group committed genocide, US says. A force fighting Sudan's army in a brutal civil war committed massacres, rape, and that amounted to genocide, the Secretary of State said 2 decades after a finding of genocide in the same region. And the story is filed by Declan Walsh. reporting from Nairobi, Kenya. The United States on Tuesday accused the Sudanese paramilitary group and its proxies of committing genocide, singling them out in a conflict of unchecked brutality, drawing fresh attentions to the scale of atrocities being perpetrated in Africa's largest war. Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken said the rapid support forces the paramilitary group fighting against Sudan's military had committed acts of genocide, including a fearsome wave of ethnically targeted violence in the western region of Darfur. The Treasury Department backed the determination of genocide with a raft of sanctions, targeting the RSF leader, General Mohammed Hamdan, as well as 7 companies in the United Arab Emirates, the group's main foreign sponsor, that have traded in weapons and gold on his behalf. The RSF and ally militias have systematically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis and deliberately targeted women and girls from certain ethnic groups for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence. Mr. Blinken said in a statement, those militias have targeted fleeing civilians, murdered innocent people escaping conflict, and prevented remaining civilians from accessing life-saving supplies. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, frankly, you know, as I said, I'm not a supporter, generally speaking, of martial punishment, capital punishment, but definitely in this case, that this guy who leads the RSF, General Hamdan, deserves, you know, the maximum penalty, you know, for what he has allowed as commander-in-chief to unfold. But at the same time, even the government, the military regime, has also committed what should be characterized, you know, if not genocide, massacres, definitely, right? So yeah, I mean, obviously, the question is why now? Why did you wait for such a long time? When now 150,000 estimated people, even more, have been killed in this war. You know, so what is the threshold for genocide? You knew they were being targeted, the victims, you know, ethnically targeted, depending on what part of the country they come from, depending on how they look like. The country, you know, they were being targeted for genocidal killing. Yeah, right? So this statement, this position could have been taken a long time ago. So now it turns out, why were you not saying this a long time ago? And one of the reasons that has been discussed is that you were trying to protect Israel, because people would point out the double standard and say, if you're calling them out on genocide, why are you not calling out the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people? You see? So that was supposedly one of the things that had been debated and allowing that. So you're telling me that because of what you feel the impact would be on Israel, to you, that was much more important than the lives of Africans in Sudan. It is just preposterous. It is disgusting. It's very ugly. It's very racist, white supremacist. But at the same time, you know, it shows you how the world operates, you know, the hypocrisy. You see? So normally when you declare something like that, it means you're outraged, right?
Yeah.
But apparently, you could have been outraged a long time ago.
To call it out.
So it's very cynical. It is welcome, of course, because this guy is a criminal, him and his associates, and they need to be held accountable, and they need to pay the consequences. But at the same time, it's very cynical and hypocritical that this is something that could have been done a long time ago and was not done for political reasons, you see.
One of the reasons why actually, when I picked up the story, it was nothing could have been a metaphor for something that was happening elsewhere. If you take out General Hamdana's name, take out Sudan's name, take out the RSF's name and take out where it was happening and replace it with the Israeli state, Benjamin Netanyahu, replace the United Arab Emirates with the United States, replace the getting of the money from sources with the United States.
Yep.
The only thing missing was you not, like you said, you not acting when you should have, waiting this long. In fact, going as far as saying what's it called? The Speaker of the House saying the International Court of Justice and the prosecutor would be sanctioned and what have you. Because when I was reading it, I was like, and the fact that it was even the New York Times that published this, like, where's the irony?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. And I want people to think about what you just said. What you said is that you are imposing sanctions on the United Arab Emirates for basically financing General Hamdan when you have been financing Israel to the tune of billions of dollars to continue genocide against the Palestinians. So it's rank hypocrisy. But it shows you the power of power and then the weakness of the lack of power, which is where Africa is today. Weak because it lacks power. It's weak because it's not united. The United States of Africa would wield power, and whatever African leadership says would have much more impact and beneficial consequences than today. It's so ironic that, you know, even before this whole concept has taken a stronger hold on the continent, when it was just starting, these African, some of them had more power back in the day than today. Nkrumah was overthrown when he had gone. He was on his way to Vietnam to try to negotiate an end of the war between the United States and Vietnam. Think about that. Who today would call any African leader to come to negotiate anything, except loan forgiveness, except more contribution of aid or food, you know? We have our work really cut out for us. But it has to begin with uniting Africa so that we can have power and then truly start negotiating.
You took the question I was going to pose on this part, which was, you already say anyway, that what role can African institutions and leaders play in mediating and resolving the Sudanese civil war?
Okay, I'm glad you did that, because that's one of the things that I had made a mental note of as well, that you said that. And the way I had, you know, made the note in my mind is, as we are reading this, where is the African agency in all of this? Where is Africa? Why does it take a statement by United States Secretary of State to have this impact? You see? And it will have impact. Because when you start sanctioning these companies, United Arab Emirates, it will have consequences.
True.
What they might do is they are going to get some high-paid lobbyist to go to the Trump administration to try to undo these sanctions. You know? That's what they're going to try to do. See? At the same time, we, as African people, need to join with our Sudanese sisters and brothers and also counter lobby and say, you know, Black Lives Matter. So do not undo these measures that the outgoing administration is doing. And of course, it waited until the last week, because then it would not have to, you know, endure criticism for a long time. That was part of the reason to wait for such a long time as well. So, you know, the people that are criticizing them, saying, why did you wait that long? Next week, they'll be gone. And next week, there will be another president sworn in.
So no agency. Africa has
no agency by Africa. Not even saying, you know, a joint statement by the executive chair of the African Commission and the U.S. Secretary of State. You know.
And it's sad. It's sad. It's sad.
It's sad. They don't see no need for that. They're not saying that, oh, after meeting with the South African president, Ramaphosa, you know, the two, you know, statesmen
decided,
came up with this position. You know, South Africa will also impose sanctions. Because obviously, I guarantee you, a lot of those businesses do business in South Africa as well. To make it appear as if Africa also has some agency in Africa. Not even that. And the US did not even see the bother of trying to do something like that, even for public relations purposes. Because at the end of the day, you don't matter, Africa. Unite so that you can start having global impact.
Yes, yes. With that story, we've come to the end of another interesting episode. Hope you found value in it. If this is your first time here, please do like, share, and subscribe. Again, subscribe. Each one bring one, because we're having this conversation about Africa so that when push comes to shove, you're much more informed as to what the happenings are and giving context to stories you might read in the Western media. Because let's not kid ourselves, the Western media is there to, you know, do the bidding of their paymasters. And their paymasters don't look like you and I. So you know how that story is going to be spun.
Correct.
Thank you very much, Brother Milton. And last words?
A luta continua. The struggle continues until victory.
Yes, victory asceta. And for me, I would say Odigbakono, which means till we meet up next time, and you have a glorious week, and see you all next week. Good night. Yes, that's it. Oh,
wow, that was fast, man.
Yeah, that was fast. Thank you very much.
Asante sana ndugu. Let me go and get my brunch now.
Yes, you should. Yes, you should.
Okay.
Thank you.